TypeScript is winning. Some of you might remember there was TypeScript and Flow. There's no longer a thing, it's just TypeScript. We spent so much time debating all of this, and we made that conservative choice that we wanted to be able to support everything. Now we have realized and decided we only need to support TypeScript, and therefore we can take away that Rust query engine. We can convert it to TypeScript. We can have a single mono repo with a much simpler code base. You can just dive in and understand as a TypeScript developer. So I'm really excited for that.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Web Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Ocel. I'm the VP of Innovation at This.Labs. Today, I am joined by my wonderful co-host, Danny Thompson. Danny is the Director of Technology at This.Labs. Danny, how are you doing today?
Cold, man. It's so cold in Texas. But outside of that, I'm great.
Wait, what does cold in Texas mean?
It was like 12 degrees yesterday. So
Fahrenheit, imperial units for all those people joining us from overseas. Yeah.
I believe it's like negative 7,000 or something like that, apparently.
That sounds right.
It's like in the 50s. Oh, no, never mind. I was doing the reverse engineering. I was thinking 12C. Yeah, I was like, 12C is not that bad. Yeah, 12 Fahrenheit. That's okay, fair enough. Well, we're glad that you decided to curl up inside with us on this podcast. And we're very excited to welcome our guest today, Søren Schmidt. Søren is the CEO at Prisma and also the founder. Søren, how are you doing today?
Doing good, thank you. Rob and Danny, it's great to meet you, and thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you here. Prisma is one of our, certainly one of our favorite techs that we enjoy, using. I've used it on a lot of side projects for sure. I think one of the first things that I'm curious about, actually, because it's not often we get to talk to founders of some of these technologies that so many people use. And I'm just kind of curious if you could kind of take us back. Like, how long have you been working on Prisma, and like, why? What made you? Why did you want to get into this sort of ORM and database space?
What are you doing? What are you?
Yeah, exactly. What's wrong with you?
That's a great question. We've been doing this for a very long time. It's been 9 years now. We started in 2016. And in 2016, it was not called Prisma. We did a thing called Graphcool. Graphcool was a backend as a service. And why did we do this? So Johannes, my co-founder, and I, we had both spent a couple of years building multiple projects, starting, failing, partway succeeding with a number of startups. And in each of these projects, we have used other backends as a service tools. We used Firebase for some, Parse. I was really fond of Parse at the time. Like, they got acquired by Facebook and eventually shut down. But the repeated experience we had using those tools was that they were great for getting started, and then you hit a ceiling, and then you started regretting that you had to use that tool to begin with. So at the time, we were young, naive, you might say, and we thought we could do better. So we had just heard about GraphQL from Facebook. The world has started to adopt React. You had these standardized front-end components. We thought, this is really cool. We think we can do a better version of a backend as a service that gives you a database that uses GraphQL as an auto-generated API. And then some magic dust and React, and then that experience would be better. So we did that. We launched Graphcool. We got about 500,000 applications deployed on this thing. It was actually quite successful in the span of a year and a half. But we found that our best customers, the customers from real companies with real money, they would build a prototype on Graphcool. They would validate that prototype. And then when they were, this is a great thing for us to build, they would allocate a real budget with real engineers using real technology, not Graphcool. And that was, of course, a big problem for us, because if all of our best customers, they just went and did something else, we could never really build a sustainable business. So we went out and spoke to those companies, and we tried to learn what did they like about Graphcool and what could they potentially bring with them for these real projects where they were ready to build it for production use cases. And what they all talked about, they really, really liked, was that database abstraction that looked a little bit like GraphQL. So that is what became Prisma. Prisma is an ORM, an open source piece of software, a concept that is really well understood, but we designed it with the learnings we have gotten from Graphcool. So if you have used Prisma, you'll see that it looks a little bit like a GraphQL API, but in TypeScript. It's really nice to use. You have this declarative expression of the data you need, which is this tree structure that you're used to from GraphQL. And then the ORM fetches that for you. It avoids a lot of the pitfalls with, you could call last generation ORMs. We have these N+1 query problems and so on. We solve that because it looks and behaves like GraphQL. But because it's just an open source library that you can adopt in your application, it is now being used in inside large organizations. We have some recent stat that 50% of the Fortune 2000 companies are using Prisma for something. So we have made it over that chasm, and that's been our journey for the last 9 years now.
You know, it's interesting because I've thought about this for a while, and you know, especially with the whole open source aspect, Prisma being open source, I've definitely seen firsthand how a lot of other open source softwares and tools also utilize Prisma, which I think is fantastic. But it's like,
Super cool.
How does that community end up influencing certain things? And then there's often this perception where if something is open source, there's potential where there's like it's a community love project versus a business, and where's that line really drawn? And then when you start getting in the conversation of those Fortune 2000 or those enterprise level organizations, oftentimes they're seeing things like, oh, if it's open source, will it be maintained for the long term? Where's the draw? Where's the negatives? How do you even counteract some of those conversations going in with them?
So there's a number of different questions, but let's talk about the community the community contribution part first. I think first of all, we have not been very good at running an open source community. If you go and look at the Prisma code base, you will see that the vast majority of all contributions is from Prisma employees. If you go and look at other open source projects, some will be like this, where it's nominally open source, but it's developed by one company. And then you have something very different, like the Linux kernel that is developed by lots and lots of different people. Our architecture, because of historical baggage, is pretty complicated. That means it has been difficult for individual developers, for users to just go and look at, understand the code base and contribute. So we're fixing that now. If you go and look at our blog, you'll find a few months ago we put out the Prisma ORM manifesto. We are re-architecting the ORM. We are changing it so that it becomes much easier to extend and much easier to work with. There's lots of technical details we can dive into if you're interested, but the first main point is for 2025, that's our main initiative, making sure that we become a proper open source project that everybody can contribute to. Now, you mentioned these other players in the ecosystem that are building on top of Prisma, and that is super exciting. There are a number of projects that are building frameworks that embed Prisma at the foundation, the same way Ruby on Rails has active records. It's built in, it's tightly integrated. And we have a number of JavaScript frameworks that do the same thing. And that was actually a core strategy of our kind of adoption in the early days. We went out and talked to people who were building frameworks, who were doing these kind of things, and worked with them to make sure that Prisma was designed to work well in those use cases, and then did a bit of lobbying and positioning ourselves to be in those places. And today we have 1 million developers using Prisma, but 6-7 years ago, that was not the case. We had a few hundred people using Prisma, and we were really trying to figure out how can we get Prisma in front of more people. So working with those communities was I think that was really critical for us gaining momentum in the early days.
I mean, you kind of mentioned, we can go down a little bit more technical. I kind of would be interested in that. Hopefully listeners too, but I know I'd definitely geek out a little bit. So can you kind of go over a little bit of that, what you're doing there to re-architect it?
So let's talk about why Prisma is architected the way it is today. Prisma is primarily two components. It's what we call a query engine that is written in Rust and then optionally compiled to WebAssembly, but it's written in Rust. And the idea is that this query engine is the thing that does all of the heavy lifting, all the hard work. And then we have a language wrapper. So that's the thing that you interact with when you're writing JavaScript, a TypeScript application. You do your Prisma queries, you have really cool auto-completion and 100% type safety. That's the language wrapper. And there's an interface between the two. The language wrapper doesn't really do much. It just gets all of the instructions, the query shapes, the possibilities from the query engine. And when a query has to be executed, that happens in the query engine. The reason we did it this way is that 7-8 years ago, it wasn't obvious to us that JavaScript and then TypeScript would be as dominant as it is today. Today, we know that TypeScript is an important language for application development also inside enterprises, and it is growing. back then we thought, well, we can get started with this new TypeScript stuff. That's going to be really cool. But then eventually, surely, we will have to support Java and Go and Python. So the idea was that a Rust-based query engine could be reused in all these language environments. And then we would just have to do that thin language wrapper. It has turned out that all we need to care about is JavaScript and TypeScript. TypeScript is winning. Some of you might remember there was TypeScript and Flow. That's no longer a thing. It's just TypeScript, and TypeScript is dominating.
That used to be a hot take, but yes. It is well matured since then. Yeah,
I was about to get on my soapbox.
Yes, we spent so much time debating all of this, and we made that conservative choice that we wanted to be able to support everything. Now we have realized and decided we only need to support TypeScript, and therefore we can take away that Rust query engine. We can convert it to TypeScript. We can have a single monorepo with a much simpler code base. You can just dive in and understand as a TypeScript developer. So I'm really excited for that.
You don't hear a lot of people talking about doing that. Like, there's not a performance concern at play here that y'all are worried about as far as the efficiency of translating the queries?
So there is a performance benefit to having the Rust query engine, and there's a performance penalty. And in practice, I think we're going to be better off without the Rust part. The performance penalty is in two areas. One, because of this monolithic design, we need to bundle drivers for all the databases we support into a single binary, and that means it's going to take up some space whether you need it or not. So if you deploy to serverless functions, for example, and you include Prisma, that is going to add like 15 megabytes to your bundle, which is a lot. So we can strip that down to less than a megabyte. We're excited for that. The other part is every time you need data to go from JavaScript, TypeScript to Rust, you need to serialize it. It has to become a string, and then you need to deserialize it again on the way in and on the way out. And this is actually pretty expensive CPU-wise. And because all of your data passes through this boundary twice, you end up paying a lot of CPU for that. So if you load a lot of data, that's the reason Prisma can be slower than using an alternative like Drizzle. So with this translation to 100% TypeScript, we get rid of that.
That's really interesting. A little counterintuitive, but that does make sense, the way that would work out. I'm going to take this a slightly different direction, which is that one of the things that is interesting to me is that when I've heard, and when like Prisma, especially early on, when people really getting excited putting it in, I mean, it also, I think, was there at the right time as sort of meta frameworks became popular. So just the rise of Remix, of, obviously Next, etc. I think people were really focusing now again on backend. They'd just been doing their spas for so long, and all of a sudden everybody kind of became a little bit backend. The fact that they could configure it in code, I think, appealed to people so much. I think the schemas were so intuitive. And then, like you said, the declarative sort of a querying language. But what I'm curious about is that those are things that I think people encounter on their side projects very early on. And they're things that are annoying if you don't have someone to walk you along. But then at the same time, though, you guys are being used by these big enterprises. Talk to me about the trade-offs that you have to do as a company and as an engineering team to build something that is both fun and exciting to use for hobbyists on a side project, but yet powerful and feature-rich enough to be useful in enterprises, because that doesn't seem like it can be done by accident or by happenstance.
That's a great question, and that is the journey we have been on as a company. Whenever you bring something to market, you need it to be adopted, and you need people to talk about it so they can grow and spread. So there's this famous graph, the technology adoption curve. It's a bell curve, and you always have to start down bottom left. You target the innovators, the early adopters, people who are willing to take a risk, people who know it might not work out, but then they'll just go and rework it because they move fast and break things anyway. So those are the people we targeted in the early days. We did all kinds of crazy things to get their attention. For the first year and a half of the Prisma project, we had this goal to be on the top of Hacker News once a month. And we'd do whatever it took to get there. And that meant we did a lot of weird things, crazy shit that wasn't directly related to Prisma, the ORM, but somewhat related. It was a good story, and we could kind of get the Prisma name in there. Now we don't do that anymore because it doesn't move the needle for us. But in the early days, it very much did. It also means we needed to jam a bunch of features in there that people could be excited about. And then we moved up this curve. We get to the point where you need to cross the chasm, you need to jump over and land on the other side. And there was a while there, 6 to 12 months, where we were really nervous. Are we going to be able to successfully cross the chasm from these early adopter people to more traditional, like, enterprise software developers? People who just go to work and do their thing and use the tools that they have to, and they go home and they don't, the kind of people you don't hear from on Twitter. So that was a big jump for us, really scary moment as a company. And we had to focus on what we care about, what we had to change what our priorities are. It is no longer about doing lots of new cool things. It's about making sure that all users of Prisma can upgrade to the new version without being worried about anything. A piece of feedback we get very often is that a user loves Prisma because they can update to a new version without worrying if things will start breaking. That's not the case for all libraries, but we put a lot of effort, a lot of time into making that happen. So that's the transition we have been going through. We have become more boring as a company,
but more essential. I mean, yes. I think you're exactly right. I mean, it's boring to do with those things that just are about being reliable, about being dependable, about being a tool that you don't have to think about being built on top of, but you are. But yet those boring things are the most vital to take care of.
Yep. And then you asked, how can you do that, but also do the exciting things? And that's a real struggle, a real challenge that we have been finding our way through. One approach we have used for a very long time is that we release preview features that are not turned on by default, kind of gated, and people who want to experiment with new cool things, they can adopt the preview features. So we have released lots of preview features that are kind of exciting, but a challenge we have had is that these features have remained preview features for a long time. They never really graduate to the core thing. So that's another thing we're doing this year. We're cleaning that up. We're going through a backlog of preview features, and for each of them deciding, are we going to put in the work to make those ready for prime time, guaranteeing backward stability and so on? Or some of them, will they just have to drop off because they weren't that important? We can't actually make them work for real. But that strategy has worked well for us.
Well, we have more of our conversation to come, but we need to take a break here to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs. This episode is proudly sponsored by This.Labs, your partner in modern web development and consulting. At This.Labs, we specialize in empowering businesses to reach their full potential through technology. We understand that in today's fast-paced tech environment, adaptability and efficiency are crucial. That's why we offer tailored solutions designed to meet your unique challenges and objectives, and our commitment to excellence and client success sets us apart as a trusted advisor in the industry. Discover how This.Labs can transform your business. Visit this.co to learn more about our services and how we can help you stay ahead in this competitive landscape. Thanks to This.Labs and my team for sponsoring this episode and for their dedication to advancing the developer community. All right, now back to our episode.
Well, I guess I'll ask this because I have a take that I think is interesting, and this I think could be a very interesting conversation, especially for a developer like me who thinks when there's too many layers of abstraction, right? Like, you're really hiding a lot of the quote unquote magic and people don't really know what's going on, right? And so Prisma abstracts quite a bit of the database layer to me and to others. People definitely have been critics about this, that a developer could maybe not understand something very deeply about what's happening under the hood. And to be honest, some argue that like an over-reliance on an ORM, like Prisma, whatever, could potentially even lead to like vendor lock-in or limit flexibility when they're trying to maybe implement another better solution for their use case, or maybe if the time came where they were like, hey, I need to evolve what it is my tech stack is, I don't have that ability now because I'm stuck. I guess, how do you respond to that? And maybe there's certain things that we're not observing when it comes to these levels of abstraction that aren't necessarily that big of a detriment. I don't really know what the case is for this, so I'd love some ideas around this.
Great questions. So one of the things you mentioned is vendor lock-in. So one thing that is really interesting with the Prisma abstraction, because it's relatively high level, is that you can pretty easily switch between databases. You can switch between Postgres and MySQL, for example, super straightforward. If you're writing raw SQL, there's often a bunch of syntax stuff you need to do differently. But you can also migrate from MongoDB to Postgres. We have lots of people who do that, or the other way around, and do it with relatively little effort. So that's an interesting benefit of having this high-level abstraction. I think maybe with vendor login, you mean being logged into Prisma, and Prisma is the vendor, and you don't want to be logged into Prisma. Well, when you adopt Prisma, then you have a pretty high, the surface area between Prisma and your application is pretty big, because every single time you interact with the database is now through Prisma. So that's a design decision you have to make, the choice you have to make. You can absolutely introduce a layer in your application. You could call it the data access layer and say, this is the only place Prisma is. But yes, when you introduce a library that is used in many places and you want to rip it out, you need to go to all of those places and change it. If you were to migrate from Prisma to another ORM, it's relatively straightforward work, but it's a lot of work. Maybe in this new world of LLMs, it can be at least partways automated. I would be less worried about that. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I do find increasingly that the fears about vendor lock-in, I think, are almost always misplaced conversations in a technical conversation. If only because it's like at the end of the day, it's like, are you really going to put a layer around your front-end framework? I want to be able to switch between React and Angular and Vue on a moment's notice. And
do you really? Yeah. Or do you want to be able to take advantage of all the functionality the library you pick provides?
Like, listen, I've been there. I've been on the engineering teams. I've even been the poor person that introduced the idea that, hey, maybe we don't always want to stay on AWS. Maybe we want to be able to effortlessly lift and shift to Azure. And it's like the amount of work it takes to support that. I mean, that's the thing. It's not that it can't be done or that there isn't value to it. It's just that the amount of effort it would take. It's like at some point, I think, like you said, you get a little bit more out of embracing your tools than you do by running away from them. And I guess maybe to continue the question is just, are there ways, and have you all thought of ways, like, yes, the ORM is putting a layer of abstraction to allow you to have kind of that non-vendor lock-in with the databases, but if you have something about your database that makes it special, like, are there ways to pipe some of those advantages through to take advantage of them through Prisma?
Absolutely. So that's a core design philosophy for Prisma, has been from day one. I come from a background of working in a relatively large team as an architect at the time. But the thing I cared about a lot is making sure that all of us on the team would do stuff in a way that is uniform and that works really well in code review scenarios. I wanted our code to be something you can look at in a diff and you could immediately see if there's something dangerous going on. So the idea about Prisma is if you keep almost all of your database interaction in this very uniform Prisma API, then whenever you see a diff that has that Prisma API, you know that nothing weird is going on because you understand what can happen through the Prisma API, and it's tremendously readable. When you think about readability versus writability of code, developers tend to gravitate towards writability. It's super cool if you can do this really complex thing with nobody can ever understand what the thing is doing.
Yeah.
Prisma is different. Yes, it's pretty easy to write, but more importantly, when you see a Prisma query, you immediately know what it's doing. So if 95% of your data access is done that way, that's great for code review, for maintainability. And then when you need to do special things, you should do special things. You should have all of the power. So that's why we have this escape hatch. You can do raw SQL queries through Prisma. And late last year, we introduced typed SQL, the ability to get auto-completion and full type safety for your raw arbitrary SQL queries. So that's really cool. And then, whenever you need to dip down and do the crazy magic stuff in the database, you can just do that. And it looks different. And a code reviewer will immediately know to pay special attention to this thing because it's not just the Prisma API.
Well, speaking of vendor lock-in, or not even vendor lock-in, but abstractions, as of the time of recording this, one new thing that has just come out is Prisma Postgres. And the thing that caught my eye the most with this announcement was the idea or hope that you can use your database like building a Notion page. You want to kind of talk about that a little bit and kind of
Yeah.
give some context there?
So we've been building cloud products for the last 3 years. And for the longest time, we resisted building a hosted database offering. We had this idea that hosted databases, it's a solved problem. Other people do it. They do it great. They probably do it better than we'll be able to. So let's not do that. If you are a big company, you have your setup already, maybe on AWS, whatever it is, you'll want to have your database in that existing trusted environment. And then maybe you'll be willing to adopt a product from Prisma that sits in between your application and your database. So we launched Accelerate as a global cache and connection pooler that sits in front of your database. That makes it really easy to scale to really big numbers connecting to your database from serverless functions, from edge compute. And that has been pretty successful as a product. But we also realized that conversion on our cloud product was much lower than we would expect. So we started to look into those numbers. We started to talk to all the people who sign up to our cloud product but don't end up using it. And what we realized is that 60% of all signups for our cloud product, they didn't want any of the stuff we had. They wanted a database. And we very emphatically did not have a hosted database. We had never talked about having a hosted database, but still what happened is people went to the Prisma website. They didn't read anything. They didn't download the ORM. They clicked on sign up because they knew they wanted a database. So obviously you have to sign up. And then we can see in the session tracking that they frantically click around for like 45 seconds and then they just leave in rage because there is no database. So people know that Prisma is a database company. They need a database, they go to Prisma. So we talked to all of those people. We talked to Prisma ORM users, and everybody wanted us to do hosted databases. So we said, okay, we need to take this seriously. And we decided that we didn't want to just do another hosted database like all the other ones. We wanted to do something special. And we wanted to do something that was appropriate for the Prisma brand values, for the majority of the Prisma community. So what we landed on was databases is too complicated. As an industry over the last 10 years, we have gone from deploying application servers that on individual machines that we care about a lot, and if we have 2 of them, then we care about 2 of them, but it's very special. We've gone from that to a world where you just deploy to serverless functions. You do not care about your servers, just spins up and down. You don't need to worry about anything. If you have a second application, you just spin that up on another serverless function. You don't need to provision a new cluster for your new microservice. It's all very fluid and easy. But the database world is very much not like that. When you have a database, you have your one database and you care very much about that one database, and you go and look at it and look at the CPU use and connection utilization and stuff like that. So we wanted to bring that same transition to the database world. And the way we talked about it internally is we wanted to make it as easy as creating another page in Notion. We do that all the time. That's what it should feel like to create another database. So you have a new project, create a new database, that's it. No big deal. You don't have to do capacity planning to think about, do I need the small plan or the big plan on Superbase or something like that? No, you just need a database and it should just always work, just like your page in Notion. That is the premise for Prisma Postgres.
It's kind of almost obvious when you hear it explained,
Yes,
because I think it is really true. It's like you have an ORM, you have a wrapper around a thing. And so people are saying, okay, well, I'm going to get you guys and the database that it wraps all at the same time. I'm curious if you can introspect into what you think this phenomenon is, because I believe, I feel like I have seen a lot of managed services announced. And I'll be honest, I don't know if some of this is just a push towards revenue after kind of the zero interest rate period that we were in for so long. And now people got to find revenue and this is a way to do it. But if we don't want to be cynical about it, I just think that we're really getting to a point now where we've become addicted to things like Vercel, things that like Netlify, where you just literally click a button and it just does the thing and you just want a website. That's all I want. I just want a website. And it's like, I can understand people wanting to do that with databases. Like anybody that's ever had to hook up, get the database set up. What are the connection strings again? You know, I need a secret store to host my credentials and I have to get all that configured. Like people just want it running. I mean, I guess that makes sense, but what do you think is behind this kind of phenomenon, I suppose, towards like people really wanting these managed services a lot more?
So there's a whole thing about AI app development that we can dive into later if you're interested. But I think in general, the story of our industry of software development is one that is towards more and more people in consecutive generations getting into this field, and people wanting to do more and more things. I think the demand for software development still far outstrips supply, and you all know this is true because you look around and you see the kind of salaries we all get. It's obscene that software developers are paid this much but that's because there's so few of us, and the value that software brings is really, really high. So every few years there's a new generation of software developers. Every generation is bigger than the previous one. So obviously, not all of those developers went to college, got a degree in software development the same way many of us did. Some people in the new generations will go through that path, but most don't, because the generations now are so big. So they need tools that are a little bit more like consumer tools, tools that are more approachable, things that they can just get to work in. The same kind of people who would build crazy things in spreadsheets 10 years ago, they're not building spreadsheets anymore. They're building apps, and they need infrastructure for all of this. And I think that's what is happening.
That's really true. I mean, that's a good point. That might have been the point that you were going to be making with the AI stuff too, is that is really the world that we're living in. I mean, like it's not about pivot tables and what kind of math you can shove into an Excel spreadsheet. Is people are going to be able to build engines of apps, even internal apps, little widgets and things like that, more powerful than they've ever been able to do before. That's actually that's an interesting point.
It was already happening with Netlify and Vercel and these hosted services that enable you to not have to worry about the Docker and the connection strings and all of that. But the AI app development explosion is just turbocharging this. If you go and look at some of the hosting vendors, they put out these graphs of how so many more people are signing up in the last few months. And that's because so many people have wanted to be able to build apps for so long, and now they can. They can put $20 or $50 into Bold or Lovable, and they can go and make something that is genuinely really cool and sometimes maybe even useful. So they do this, and they need infrastructure for that.
I guess maybe slightly changing pace a little bit, but I think a lot of developers, whether you utilize it or not, are very familiar with Prisma. I think it's become definitely a name that's recognizable to a lot of individuals. And so obviously it's evolved quite a bit since where it was to where it is now. And so I'm just like really curious, like what is like, if you look back on it, what was one of your happiest milestones, especially looking back from a perspective now of where you are now with, Prisma Postgres, it might not even been something you were thinking about back in the day, right? So, what was one of those like first big happy milestones that when you look back, you're like, that's when I knew things were great?
Anybody who has maybe built a successful open source project, but definitely anybody who's been a startup founder know that it's a constant roller coaster of ups and downs. So almost every week, every other week, there is something that you're just amazingly happy or proud about. Then immediately after, everything is chaos and everything is burning. There have been some memorable ones along the way for sure. I talked about that 6 to 12 month period where we, as a company, we really needed to cross the chasm. We need to get to that other side and be adopted, embraced by more serious developers, and also convince ourselves that had actually happened. One of the challenges with open source software is that you don't get very direct feedback. You have lots of developers who go out there, download the thing, and they never talk to you. That is especially true disproportionately true for people in this majority category, normal, serious software developers. They just use the thing, they solve their own problems, they get the work done, and then they go home. They don't come and talk to us on Twitter. So we went from this period where all of our users were super happy, yelling at us all the time on Twitter and GitHub, to having this growing user base that just didn't talk to us. And that was a scary moment because we didn't really know what that meant. It took us, I think, 12 months to realize, okay, what this means is we have crossed the chasm. We are now being embedded in large organizations. We're not failing, we're winning. And that was a really good moment.
This is a little bit of a bounce back to earlier. You know, one of the things that you were sort of talking about in this space is kind of the N+1 query. And I think like our listeners, especially the ones who have maybe used Prisma and bounced off it, or other ORMs and bounced off it, and always kind of look at it with a skeptical eye, is that issue. And I think it's really two issues at the same time, right? One is just the ease of the interface. I think sometimes people don't quite realize the potency of just saying, you know, calling what seems to be just a method on an object and not realizing really how powerful that is behind the scenes, how much it's doing. So there's kind of an education issue with the abstractions. But I mean, also there is that idea of like the joins and the optimized queries and the things that some people have said, you know, hey, if I stopped using this and I did a manual SQL query, then speeds kind of went way up. So I really do want you to address those concerns from the people that I'm sure that are listening and have been saying it for this whole conversation. Like, what are people misunderstanding about this aspect of ORMs, and how do you guys like help people work around those problems?
So if you are building a website at the most basic level, let's say you're doing traditional server-side rendering, what you want to do is at the top block, you want to load all your data. Then you want to use that data. You want to render your view and return it. That's what you want to be doing. And what sometimes ends up happening when you have very sophisticated tooling is you think that's what you're doing, but then somewhere down here in your business logic, or maybe even down in the view rendering, you end up going out and loading more data. And especially if that happens in a list, you might be going out for more data for every item in that list. And that is what is called the N+1 query problem. You do your first +1 query, and then for each of the items, you do another one. That's your N queries. That is a killer for performance. And if you use something like Active Record, as it exists in Ruby on Rails, a lot of people in the Java world, .NET world, use this kind of tooling, you run into that issue very easily because the data you get back from the ORM is not just a plain JavaScript object. It's a complex. It's an instance of a complex class that can do more things. So if you get the name from that thing, well, that's already there. But if you get list of friends, it'll go out and fetch that for you. And with list of friends, you might expect that, but something else, you might not expect it. So you can end up making that mistake. So what Prisma did differently, and other tools do it differently too, but a core design philosophy for us was, if you need that initial list and some more data, make it really easy to express that up front, the same way that it is really easy to express with Graphcool, such that you can fetch all of that data at once in the beginning, and then you can pass it on to your business logic and you can use it. So that was the first thing we did. The second thing we did was we introduced an automatic N+1 fixing solution. So if you ended up doing that N+1 thing anyway, despite our best effort to help you not to do it, we will automatically batch all of those queries in the list behind the scenes. And we're using the same concept that GraphQL servers is using. In the GraphQL world, it's called the data loader pattern. And the way it works is we have a special promise. We return not a normal promise, but something that looks very much like a promise, but it's a Prisma promise. And what that will do is it will not go and fetch your data immediately. It will let your node process run until it's either done with the thing or there's some other IO happening. and then it will take all of those and batch them together and go to your database once. So those two things together eliminate this very big foot gun that exists in what you could describe as traditional ORMs.
And I guess it's the same thing with joins, right? Like I know that there's some ways that you guys give to customize the way that the joins will occur underneath the hood. Because I think that was kind of one of the other things is sometimes if you just, it's not even that it's the ORM's fault, but if you just naively use the ORM, you don't realize that there's no sophisticated joining happening. You're just doing this thing where it's like combining every piece of data in your entire database together and then slowly filtering it all down. And I just think people sometimes just don't know that they're doing that. So it's just like, again, another one of these like powerful tools sometimes create these like important requirements of teams to increase their education. Because it's, yes, it's very easy to use. Yes, it's very powerful to use, but you need to realize just what you can do if you're not using the tools the right way.
So this is a thing we have gotten a lot of flack for, justifiably. When you need to do joins, essentially you need to load related data. There are two ways you can do it. You can either do the join and let the database handle it, or you can do multiple smaller queries and kind of stitch it all together. And those two different approaches have pros and cons. Sometimes one is faster, sometimes another is faster. Sometimes one has higher resource impact on your database, sometimes the other one does. So a decision we made early on was to pick the one that do less joins and have Prisma do more of the heavy lifting in the application layer and issue multiple smaller queries. And in some scenarios that's good. In some scenarios it's bad. And it's obvious why it's bad, because you need to do one query, wait for the result, look at that, then do another query. That is obviously slower in some cases, especially if you have a long latency distance between your application server and your database. So what we finally got around to doing 2 years ago now was introduce the ability for end users, for developers to specify which of those two they want. So in Prisma, that's called the join strategy. We still default to that old traditional behavior. But if you want us to do a full join, you can just go and have us do that. And if you're a person who wants to always do joins, you can set it to always do joins. That's fine too. And then what we do in addition to that is we make it extremely easy for you to see what queries Prisma is generating. So we have this tool called Prisma Optimize. It's a simple thing. You just turn it on locally while you're doing development, running your tests, or manually clicking around in your app. And then it records all of your queries, the latency, how long they took, presents them in a nice web UI, and even looks at them and your schema and sees are there things you should do better and gives you recommendations.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a killer feature. One of those boring features that's really, really useful.
I guess, this would be probably my final question that I have, but it's like, as you look ahead, what are you most excited about in the future of the modern web? See what I did there? No, okay. And how do you see Prisma playing a role in creating positive change? I guess whatever positive impact you could see going forward.
So a thing I'm extremely excited about right now, because of all of the energy that is pouring into this, is the world of AI assisted coding, AI driven application development. It is just really cool to see this new generation of people being empowered to go and make awesome stuff. But also it's really cool for myself, or developers at Prisma, to go and use Cursor, Windsurf to do our work. That is really, really cool. And this need for infrastructure, including databases that is really easy to use. I'm really excited to be a part of that. We didn't really dive into the technical details of Prisma Postgres, but what we are doing is very different and pretty innovative. We have the ability to create lots and lots of databases really cheaply. So if you use Prisma Postgres, you can create one database. You can create multiple databases. It doesn't really matter. And if you don't use them, they don't cost you anything. They don't cost us anything. So this is a new paradigm for databases. I'm really excited to get this integrated into all of these AI app building tools, so people can take advantage of it.
There you go. Easy scaffolding is the key,
Yes.
I guess, is for the new era. There we go. That, or just empower Devin to have your credit card so it can sign up for stuff for you. There we go. That's the
Yes, please
the AI.
put in your credit card.
All right. Well, can you let people know if they're curious to find out more, where they can find both Prisma or yourself online?
So Prisma and myself, we are on Twitter. The easiest way to reach me is go on Twitter, send me a DM. Send me a public message if you like, but DMs are open. I love to chat to everyone. Prisma website, obviously, we're also very active on GitHub. If you have an issue or a question, we have discussions and issues. Come and engage with us. We also have a Discord that is very active. Developers from Prisma are in there actively answering questions, talking to people. We do a monthly AMA that is also announced in Discord. I think the last month we started doing it with live video. That was really cool. So if you want to just engage more with us, the people behind Prisma, go and join one of those. Yeah, that's it. But really, come chat to me. I'd love to hear from you if you have questions or want to talk about something.
Great. Well, that is going to be it for us today. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this Modern Web Podcast. And thanks, of course, to our guest, Søren. As always, the conversation does not stop here. You can find Søren on Twitter, as you've heard, at SørenBS. So that's SORENBS. You can find me online at RoboCell. As for Danny, you can find him online at DThompsonDev. As for the podcast, you can find us online at moderndotweb.com or on Twitter at modern.web. And as we close out, we would just like to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs, one last time, who would like me to remind you that sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between business objectives and tech implementation, and it can get messy. This. Is trusted by top names like Meta, Google, and T-Mobile, and they love helping business leaders fulfill their strategic digital initiatives. Check them out at this.co. One more time, that's THISDOT.co. All right, see y'all next time.